Hello, everyone. This is Karen O'Hara, Director of Marketing and Communications with WorkCare. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, which is part of our ongoing COVID-19 response series. Today's topic is protecting employee mental health during a crisis. This session is being recorded and will be available after the webinar on our YouTube channel. You are on mute during the session, but you may submit your questions using the Q&A tab on your Zoom application. Today's speaker is Dr. Brittany Busse, who is an Associate Medical Director with WorkCare. Dr. Busse has expertise in telemedicine and a particular interest in the effective management of psychological components of work-related injuries and illnesses. We think this is a really important topic in relation to managing employee health and well-being, and we really appreciate your interest in joining us today. I just want to remind you before we start that we are also doing our weekly series on managing COVID-19 in the workplace every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. You should be getting an invitation for that webinar on a regular basis, but if not, just let us know. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Busse.
Thank you, Karen, and welcome everyone to this webinar. Like Karen said, I feel like mental health is a really important component of this ongoing crisis. As we know, many of our employees can still be in very good physical health, but just the way that they are relating to the world is changing, the way that they are working is changing, and a lot of that is going to impact their ability to be productive in the workplace, how they are feeling in the workplace, and will eventually, if it's not already, affect some of their physical health as well. So we really wanted to address these important pieces of mental health in addition to keeping everyone updated on the importance of screening for the physical symptoms, because we feel that the mental component can actually have a really persistent and long-term effect on your employees even after the crisis has cleared and people have gone back to, what we would consider more of a normal life. But as we see that, everything is always changing. Normal is not static. Normal is the state of society that we all find ourselves in, and it can always be changing. So when people are faced with a new situation, they're going to be asked to adapt to that new situation. And some people are going to be able to do that very easily, and other people may not be as facile at adaptation, and it may take them a lot longer just based on where they're at baseline. So we'll go over some of the things that you can do to help your employees and how to just show up for yourselves and others during this time. So your body has an acute stress response mechanism. This is an overall mind-body response. So your body actually does not differentiate, and your brain does not differentiate between acute physical threats and those things which are mental or psychological. So if you have a physical illness versus someone just threatening your security in some way, for instance, through the virus of having to worry about loved ones who are sick, those two threats are perceived in the exact same way by your body, whether it's a threat to yourself or a threat to others, along with the other fears that we're having. So acute psychological stress and physical stress are both processed by your brain through the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So hypothalamus is important for regulating emotional response. It's where a lot of memories are stored about what things are threatening and what things aren't. So that will initially release some neurotransmitters, which will stimulate your pituitary gland, which is right beneath your brain and kind of like behind your eyes. The pituitary gland then releases its own chemical steroids, which go throughout the entire body and have a variety of effects, including to stimulate your adrenal glands. And your adrenal glands produce two types of hormones that are important for stress. One is cortisol, and the effects of elevated cortisol can lead to a variety of physical issues with people. So, as a stomach upset is common with elevated cortisol, high blood pressure, cardiovascular effects, and the other hormones it releases in the short term are adrenaline. So as long as you're still perceiving a threat, your body will continue to keep that area activated. So the pituitary will keep pumping out the what we call trophic hormones, which just add more stimulation to the adrenal glands, and the adrenal glands will continue to produce cortisone as well as adrenaline. And adrenaline is what it causes our fight, flight, or freeze mechanism. So that's the body's overall reaction to a stressful stimulation. You'll either want to start fighting against that, so your body prepares for that. You'll want to run away, or in many animals' case, they will freeze. So they will become kind of physically, mentally, emotionally stuck in a certain situation. And that feel is the basis of a lot of what we call anxiety. So you have an initial fear, threat, and that could either be processed or you're going to stay stuck in it. And when a person stays stuck in it, they'll be replaying that fear over and over again, and that can take over their physical as well as mental processes during that time. So when you're stuck in that freeze situation, it's really hard to focus on other things like work, taking care of family, etc. So it's important to note that, like all of us are different physically, we're all very different mentally and emotionally as well. We all come into this world relatively the same, but over time, our brains are exposed to different experiences and we start to adapt to the world around us. So whether that's, certain crisis that you're faced with, the way that your family learns to react to each other, your coping mechanisms, all of that becomes part of your adaptation mechanism. So that's your ability to face a crisis and also transcend that crisis, and your ability to tolerate a change to your habitual way of doing things and to develop these new normals in relationship to new situations. So just like, based on someone's physical conditioning, they may or may not be able to repeatedly lift 50 pounds. Based on someone's mental conditioning, they may or may not be able to react quickly and to adapt fully in a time of crisis. So they may experience a period of cognitive slowing, of difficulty concentrating, and they may suffer some temporary symptoms of depression, like loss of pleasure and feeling very detached from themselves and others. And you may be noticing that in your employees. So some employees that just might not be adapting as well as others, because over time, every time you have a stressor, it takes away some of your ability to adapt to the next stressor, and they will become additive over time. So if you keep adding on, weights onto someone's barbells, eventually they're not going to be able to bench press it anymore. They're going to max out at a certain point, and everybody's going to reach that point at a different time. So it's really important to look at employees as individuals and not, just as a group, because every single person is going to have a different ability to adapt to these situations. And stressors, they can be, anything that causes that reaction in your body. So the body doesn't differentiate between, you say, like, getting ready for a half marathon, so you're running a lot, that to your body is a stress, versus, getting a cut or a burn. They're both considered physical stresses, and the body reacts the same way to a really good psychological event, like, the anticipation of a wedding versus, having something like the COVID-19 crisis. Those are all stressors. So, thinking about employees, it might not be, just the good thing or the bad things that are happening to them. It may have a lot of good events happening, and all of these things together, they might not understand why they're feeling so acutely distanced from their work when they otherwise can note a lot of good things happening in their life. It's just overall taxing their body's adaptation mechanisms. And we want to take a minute to differentiate also that, this would not be classified as burnout. I know there's some information going around on how to deal with occupational burnout. Most of the employees are presenting with more symptoms of acute stress response because this is a new thing, a new adaptation. It's not really a result of the chronic workplace stress that hasn't been successfully managed. There could be an underlying baseline of chronic stress, either from work or from other things, but burnout is really specifically categorized as a work phenomenon. So it's not the general medical condition. It doesn't take into account what else is going on in the employee's life. It likely doesn't take into account, acts of nature such as like pandemics. It's really a long-term chronic wearing down of employees. Now, there's employees who may already be chronically stressed out, like I said, whether from work or from other things, may be in a plateau phase where they've kind of taken on as much stress as they could take in their daily lives, and something happening suddenly like COVID-19 may tip them over the edge into a temporary state of exhaustion. It's a little bit different than burnout or that wearing down where you just become kind of numb and immune to what's going on around you, but they may just completely bottom out. And so that would be a state of emotional and physical exhaustion. They might feel the need to sleep more, have that trouble focusing and not really able to fully commit and connect at work. But we definitely want to make it clear that the burnout's a very different situation than what we're talking about here, which is the acute stress response. So what we see with acute stress is people will start to develop certain psychological components usually within a month of exposure to a stressor. And the stressor is either a very severe physical threat or a severe psychological threat. And, in the case of COVID-19, we have a little bit of both. So we have, that overwhelming fear that people are experiencing has a, very profound impact on people's brains. And so that profound impact and the activation that is being experienced, it pulls away the blood supply from their normal areas we use to process information, the frontal cortex, and really centers our blood and our preoccupation in those emotional centers of the brain, those areas that focus on keeping us alive. And that's kind of your midbrain, and not those areas that we typically use a lot at work for higher level processing. So the symptoms that start to present come from a dysregulation or a loss of blood flow to that frontal part of the brain, and what we consider to be the more advanced or more developed part of the brain. So people will notice they have a difficulty concentrating. They're not taking any pleasure in their work or in their everyday activities anymore. There's this feeling that this isn't real, that there's something, here that's just, you're no longer in touch with reality. People may also become overly emotional, or they may become very blunted in their emotions. So those are some of the things that we start to notice. It seems similar to depression in a way, but it has a more time-limited response. So you have a stressor, within a month you start to develop these symptoms, and then as you adapt to your surroundings, these symptoms can start to disappear over a period of about 6 months. Some of the physical symptoms, again, are associated with that self-preservation and your body's stress adaptation system, such as the hypothalamic pituitary axis. So people become hypervigilant. You might notice you startle more easily. You're constantly scanning your surroundings, looking for signs of threat. Because of this hypervigilance, people have difficulty sleeping. So they might be complaining more of insomnia, as well as having a physical and mental restlessness. It's just very difficult to relax. Because of this, you might feel more irritable. It's very difficult to regulate your emotional responses. Because normally, we can, for the most part, take a breath between something stimulating us and what we have as a reaction to those things. But during a time of stress, you might have a very knee-jerk default response to those situations, and people can become more activated much more easily. Another thing that we notice is people become more accident prone. Again, you're losing some of that cognitive function of the prefrontal cortex that tells you when something around you is dangerous or keeps you aware. So you might be scanning for threats overall, but you might miss the small thing in front of you and slip or trip on it. So you might be noticing, employees more prone to slip and fall type accidents right now, or tripping and hurting themselves or doing things that they wouldn't normally do, because their brain is so preoccupied with this larger situation that they're dealing with in the environment. Talking just about some of the physical symptoms we already talked about, people may have some upset stomach, diarrhea, racing heart, shortness of breath, headaches, and fatigue. And that might make them feel even more hypervigilant, and you as well as an employer, because those are also some of the potential signs and symptoms of coronavirus. So at this point where we're dealing with people with acute stress response who might never have had anxiety before, they may also be dealing with these physical symptoms, which again is a feedback loop for them. During this time of illness, they might feel they could potentially have the illness, and instead they're having this stress reaction. So we know there's a lot of different sources of acute stress during the COVID-19 crisis. And these different areas of acute stress and fears are going to play in each person's life differently. So some of us may feel very stable when it comes to meeting our basic needs, and we might have more higher level fears, such as guilt and grief over what's been lost. But many of our employees might be working under those very basic fears. Each fear is going to cause the same stress response. So there's no reason to really differentiate, is this one worse than this one? Or we just know that for every single fear the person has, this effect is going to be cumulative. So your employees may have very basic fears, like I said, of just how do I meet my basic needs? How do I meet the needs of my family during this time? Can I provide, adequate food for my family? Do we have enough water to drink? Do we have enough toilet paper during this time? And how are we providing for our physiological needs of ourselves and our loved ones? Loss of sleep is going to be a big one. Again, that's a very basic physiological need that people have. They need to have adequate sleep, and it needs to be restful. So when people are losing sleep, they're going to lose a lot of their ability to process information. And again, that's a feedback loop. So the less you sleep, the more anxious you might become about not sleeping, and the less you're going to sleep. People are going to have a lot of concerns for their health, as well as their personal safety. So thinking about, will I get sick is a big thing. How are my family members doing? If people have older relatives, how are they doing, especially if they're in a place that's far away? And the second question about safety is, who are they sheltering in place with? You hear a lot about people having to shelter in place with partners that they may have wanted to break up with prior to COVID-19, or even to the extent of having a partner who is physically dangerous, and now you're having to be around that person constantly. Or perhaps they were kind of borderline before, and because of the stress that they're experiencing, they may have become, emotionally or physically abusive during this time, and your employee might be worried about, where can I go? They might have been going to work to escape this situation, and now they are left with no place to go. So we have those kinds of concerns about personal safety, as well as the safety of others around them. A lot of employees may find themselves drinking or using drugs as a coping mechanism. And, this is not uncommon, especially when it comes to drinking. They might not feel they're drinking excessively, but they might be drinking more than usual. And drinking alone will cause an increase in anxiety. We know that the after effect of alcohol is a heightened level of anxiety, heightened cortisol. And so it definitely, again, is a cycle effect. The more you drink or do drugs as a numbing mechanism, the more your body will upregulate your nervous system, and you'll have more anxiety and you'll reach for those things more often. So it can often turn into a vicious cycle of drinking. They may also be concerned about sheltering with someone who is drinking too much or has a drug problem, and they're not sure how to get help for themselves or others during that time. So once we pass some of these physical safety, you're going to have concerns over job loss. So people thinking, I've been, laid off for a period of time. Is my job still going to be there when I go back to work? Or if I'm still working, how long am I going to be able to continue working? I wonder how my company is doing during this time. So as they worry about that, they're going to be worried about, do I have money in the bank? How far will it go? How long will it last me? And those financial worries can be very pressing for people. Working from home in and of itself can be very difficult for people to adjust to if they haven't ever worked remotely before. So you're going into your home space and now you're going to try to conduct work. And of course, there's a lot of information out there for people about, how do you dress when you work from home to get yourself, ready to go, creating a space. But for many people, that's just not an option. They may be living in a one-bedroom apartment and their only place to go is the kitchen table. And they're right in the middle of everything. Their children are there, their spouse is potentially there. How do they focus on work? And how do you create a boundary between that space and the rest of your life? So not only how do I create a boundary from home impeding on work, how do I create a boundary after my work is done on work impeding on home? It's very difficult to create those mental boxes for people who aren't used to doing that. So that could be a very stressful situation where they feel like work is never really over for the day. A lot of concerns about childcare right now, having children at home. What is their educational situation going to be like? The parents may feel ill-equipped to provide education to their children. Maybe they struggled in math and science and now they're faced with the problem of trying to homeschool a child, in middle school. Maybe they just don't have the ability to help the child with their homework, and that's definitely going to be stressful. For many people, they're feeling a loss of community, feeling completely disconnected and abandoned during this time, and there's an overall sense of loneliness. And we know that during this time, many people might reach out, to their social media, but there's many studies that show that the social media actually increases our sense of distance and sense of loneliness. You might feel that someone else is, quote, doing better during the coronavirus or quarantining better than you are. And now you have that comparison element that only increases your sense of loneliness. We might see people together when you're all alone. So we don't necessarily get the same closeness that we have when we're able to see others. I had a friend the other day who relayed the experience of going to the store when everyone's wearing masks. And she said, I'm smiling at everyone. I hope they know that. I wonder if they're smiling back at me. And so we have that loss of connection when we can't create the usual social and emotional resonance that we do when we see other people. So she actually went up to somebody, or when she was passing somebody, said, I'm smiling, can you tell? And that person said, I'm smiling back at you. I hope you're well. And like just creating those moments of shared intimacy in the situation is very difficult. And as we move up the hierarchy, people may begin to feel some guilt. What am I doing to help others? Or, for anyone who's been sick, maybe they feel some guilt that they may have been sick, and did I expose anyone else when I was sick? And finally, a big one is grief over what's been lost, whether that's just your normal day-to-day activities or people who are postponing major life events like weddings and other things where they might have some grief over a death in their family or the loss of certain relationships. There's a lot of, things to be grieving during this time. So we like to, be really aware that for your employees who are still working, especially those of us who are working from home, it's not our normal work situation. We're not working from home during this time. We're at home in our lives and we're trying to work during a crisis. And so the normal ways that our body reacts, the way our mind works is going to be very different. So we want to keep that in mind when dealing with employees, that this is a novel situation, and they're going to require some special attention, some more than others. So what can you as employers do to help your employees during this crisis? I think the most important thing that you want to look at is, how are you taking care of yourself? Because a lot of this might be resonating for you as well, not just your employees. You have a lot of these same thoughts and needs, and you are under a very extreme amount of stress. And we tend to label all of these things just as, I feel stressed, I feel stressed out. But each of those feelings is an emotion. And when we're breaking down stress, it's really important to break down the individual emotions that you're having, as well as the individual fears. And there's a podcast host, Tim Ferriss, who talks about fear setting. And fear setting can be a really important exercise during this time. Is just, what am I afraid of? And listing all of those things as they come up for you in the moment, listing your emotions as they come up for you in the moment, and getting really specific about those things. And when you do that, it gives you a better sense of control. So you want to first acknowledge all of these emotions and fears that are coming up, and then have compassion for yourself. Like, this is normal. This is a normal human reaction that I'm having. And it's okay for me to be having this reaction in this time. And just making that a part of your daily awareness. What judgments are you making about yourself? How could you be more kind to yourself? Because those same judgments are going to be mirrored out to those around you, whether that's your coworkers, employees, your family members. You're going to be making judgments towards them just as you're making them towards yourself. So those judgments you're making are really the clues that bring you back to your fears and to your emotions. And sometimes it's a good practice to take a break between what we call the stimulus and the response. So Viktor Frankl is famous for saying, there's a space between stimulus and response, and in that space you get a choice, and you get to choose your reaction to what's happening. So don't be afraid to take that step back and move from a reaction, an automatic reaction, into a more thought out response. You get to choose. So they say, first be aware of the response, have compassion for yourself, and then choose the next best thought. Whether that's just simply, how I'm going to move forward from this, or looking up, what is the next plan for me? A big fear was, I don't want to go to the grocery store. What if there's a long line? What if they don't have something I want? And rather than preoccupying with that, I found out, my local co-op has inventory online. I could even create my shopping basket and go pick it up. And so that one action, just taking control in that one small way, helps to free up my attentional space from fear into making space for moving forward and helping others. The next thing to do is just to show up and be vulnerable with your employees. This is not a situation for, armoring up and saying it's all okay and keeping it together and putting on a brave face for everybody. we are all in this together. You know, whether you're the CEO of your company or the person, you know, sweeping up the floors, everybody is in this together. We are all experiencing stress on a very basic and human level. We're all experiencing fear. We're all experiencing different emotions. You don't have to get into the specifics about your fears and how you're dealing with them, but simply showing up and letting people know that you're having a human experience in this time will help you connect better with your employees. And so vulnerability is really meant to relate people on a human level, not to try and garner sympathy, like, oh, you know, be nice to your boss today, or be nice to your mom today, mommy's going through a lot. You know, all of those things, we know how that feels, versus, hey, you know, this is a scary time. I know I'm having fears. I know, you know, I've been sad, you know, so it's really normal for you to be afraid or to feel sad. And please let me know I'm here to help. You know, that goes a long way towards connecting you to other people during this time. It's really important. You know, we saw that list of acute stressors, to just have that awareness. You're looking around at your employees and you might be thinking, you know, who's dealing with these kinds of things? It might be, you know, an automatic human reaction, just assume like, oh, they must be stressed about this, or maybe they're stressed about that, and just to act on those assumptions. It's a lot more powerful to just ask someone. So there's a tribe in South Africa, and their greeting is Sawubona, and that basically translated means, I see you. You exist to me as a person, and I acknowledge that I see you, and I'm acknowledging that you exist, and that as a person you have needs. And so when you're seeing that person, it's more than just saying hello. It's really like taking the time to see who they are and what they need in that situation. And when you ask a person, what do you need? That really opens up a space for them to let go and to feel free in that space, and just have an openness to receiving the answer. Maybe you don't know how to fix it. That's not the important part. You know, if you hear something from somebody and you don't know how to fix it, just, you know, reassuring them like, that is a legitimate fear, that is a legitimate need. Let me see what we can do about it. And then getting creative about how to find that answer. Another thing it's really important to do during this time is make space for agency. So agency is our second step in our active compassion here at WorkCare. Awareness is the first step. Agency is the next step. Agency just means you're letting somebody exert some sense of control in a situation, and that creates some self-efficacy for them, and that improves their mood and outcomes. So if you have an employee, you know, working from home, and you've never had employees working from home before, you might be tempted to have a lot of meetings just to keep track of them during the day. Or, you know, you might be micromanaging their projects, sending them a lot of texts and emails, you know, quote, checking in. And that is adding a lot more stress, you know, to you as well as to the employee, because you're getting involved in the minutia of a project when you should be able to have a high level view of all the projects. So it's really important to give them that sense of agency, to let them know that you trust them to do their work even when they're far away, and allowing the space and time for them to transition into this new workspace. So, you know, letting some project deadlines, if they can slide, like extending them a little bit, letting employees know, hey, this was due, you know, Friday, but I'm going to give you till next Wednesday to do it. I think it's an important time during this transition that we move a little bit more slowly, and just showing compassion again for yourself as well as others. Another important thing you can do with employees who are working from home is we have a tendency to create a lot of busy work, which we would define as intellectual exercises. They don't have a real goal or outcome. So by making work more definite, you will decrease people's stress. So giving a very specific project to work on with very specific incremental deadlines and goals will actually help your employees with their sense of achievement, keep them connected with their work, and help them to meet those project deadlines as they do adapt to being at home. Like I said, they may have family at home, and they may have to work their projects in with the other things that they're doing during the day. So giving them these deadlines will allow them to put the work into the time spaces where it fits. So they're going to feel a lot more efficacious during their work if they feel like, wow, I'm achieving these milestones for my boss during this time. We know that indefinite work or busy work can actually increase people's anxiety because there isn't a lot of visibility. So they might be preoccupied with, how does my boss know I'm working? You know, I want them to know that I'm here. A lot of us do need that external motivator to feel satisfied with our daily work. So you may go to sleep at night wondering if you're still an important part of the team. Which again can exacerbate the anxiety and insomnia and lead to those physical symptoms that we talked about earlier. We also want to create time for socializing. You know, employees do socialize during work hours. They're not constantly sitting at their desks busy. You want to make time for that during the day as well. So maybe setting aside some time where employees could gather, you know, calling it something like water cooler time, or, you know, creating a Zoom room where people can pop in and say hi to each other. And just giving employees a way to connect and socialize without talking about work. So they could either meet one-on-one, you could create Zoom rooms for them, or whatever your company is using to connect remotely. Just, you know, and even if employees are still coming in and you want them to be in a socially distant situation, maybe you could set up, you know, chairs in a room that are pretty far apart, but people could go in there and talk from their spaces. I don't know, we want to get creative, you know. We want employees to feel isolated from each other. Another cool management technique is to have something called one-on-ones, which are like 10-minute meetings, 15-minute meetings, where you meet with the employee and you just share what's happening with you personally and what's happening with them personally, and you don't talk about work or their projects or where they're at with their goals. It's just a time to check in maybe once a week. If you have a lot of direct reports, you know, maybe every other week, but just making that personal time so that your employees know you care about them as people. And during that time, it's really great to show gratitude for them and to ask them to share also what they might be grateful for. We also want to promote any resources you do have. So if you're having any kind of employee assistance program that they can call for people who are having any kind of difficulty, are there resources in your area that you could become aware of for people in dangerous situations? Are there phone numbers you could place in a position where all employees have access to them, not, you know, singling out one person? Maybe send out a company-wide email to people. There are a lot of resources out there for people in unsafe situations. So just making those available globally, you know, not singling anyone else, so that that person maybe feels more safe coming forward. Maybe setting, you know, hours where they could just pop in to talk to an HR person, kind of like you know, office hours we used to have with our professors. You know, are there going to be HR hours where someone could schedule a 15-minute check-in with somebody in HR just to make sure things are okay? How do we get creative with the resources that we have to help employees with these types of mental health issues? And we want to make sure, you know, everyone has access to good and accurate information about coronavirus. So, you know, it's great. A lot of you are with us here at WorkCare. We know a lot of you have been showing up for our weekly informative webinars with Dr. Harris, which is awesome. We're happy to provide you with any information you need. You know your employees are out there looking for information, and we don't know what is the level of accuracy in the information that they find. So the brain does not like things that are unknown, and so you'll start searching for the known. And if you have good information, it might make you feel better. If you have bad information, that could definitely increase anxiety. You know, they might also be looking for information about, you know, their job. So they might want weekly updates. It might be helpful to have a weekly update on the health of the company. Like, we're doing great, guys. You know, keep it up. This is what's happening at your workspace. So people feel safe in their employment status and that they know when things are going to change ahead of time. And we want to make sure that this information comes at a level that people can really understand it. And the last thing is to just really confront any bias and prejudice head on. There's been quite a bit of Prejudice in with the coronavirus, just from the nature of the virus, initially being in China, people may be afraid of other races. I've heard a lot talking to employees about coronavirus. A lot of people are saying, I don't want to go to work. I don't trust my coworkers. They are going to come to work sick and they're going to make me sick. And so they're really afraid of other people right now, that they could make them sick, that they could cause them to die or be in the hospital. So we really want to talk about what you're doing to assure that people who are sick are able to stay home, what we're doing to prevent the spread of COVID-19, and just being completely egalitarian about this prevention. We're not going to single out one group. We're going to apply the same prevention technique to everybody. As far as what happens next or what happens in the long run, there's some great news coming forward, like the death rates might be stabilizing, the new infection rates are stabilizing in many areas where we saw those initial peaks. They might be starting to flatten out because of what everybody's been doing to avoid spreading the disease, and that's all good news, but we don't really know what's going to happen in the long run, not just with COVID-19, but with these mental stresses that have been created. People might be working now in an elevated level of what we call the phase of resistance, which is very similar to in diabetes when you become insulin resistant. So your body sees too much cortisol and adrenaline, and the areas of your body that need to be sensitive to cortisol and adrenaline will actually down-regulate their response. And that is a protective mechanism for your body because it doesn't want to be burned out very quickly, but it does make it more difficult to be stimulated later on and to mount the same kind of reactions that you did before. So you do see some issues with immunity in relation to chronic stress, especially autoimmune diseases, because the immune system normally is decreased during stress response with cortisol, but the white blood cells might, decrease their awareness of cortisol, and they then will start to overreact. So we might see a spike in autoimmune diseases. This might also lead to increased cancers, heart disease. We're not sure, what kind of physical situation we might be looking at for people, which is why it's really important to address acute stress now and give people the help that they need in adapting to this situation. Because we don't want them to hit that phase of exhaustion where they're completely bottomed out, they have no resources left, and ultimate ending in the phase of exhaustion is that the person dies. Their body simply can't take any new stressors. So we want to make sure that we understand that health is health, whether we're protecting employees physically during coronavirus. We also want to protect them mentally. Mental health is a really important component of health, as is the social health of your employee. In the long run, the health of your company is going to be tied to the health of your employees. So at WorkCare, we say protecting employee health from hire to retire, and we want to be here for you during this time to help you protect the health of your employees and to give you resources. If you need anything, please reach out to us. We are all in this together, and WorkCare is definitely here to help. So that's all I have for you today, and I guess we'll open it up if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Busse. We really appreciate your insights. The first question relates to one of your final slides about the long-term impacts of the pandemic. But you talked about physical illness that could be a factor. Could you talk a little bit more about the long-term psychological effects of a crisis?
Yeah, I think it just really depends. The people are going, how long are people going to be in a state of hypervigilance? And is that going to lead to, more chronic symptoms of depression, just because their body might be tired of being in such a heightened state for such a long time? So, what often happens after a heightened state is that period of even temporary fatigue or exhaustion. What people call adrenal fatigue also has been called adrenal burnout. And the feelings associated with that are just, extreme fatigue, difficulty, again, you're still having difficulty concentrating, difficulty with emotional regulation, because your body is just, too tired. You expended a lot of energy during this time producing cortisol. For employees who are women, you might also have some kind of responses that have to do with the sex hormones that are produced by the adrenals. So adrenals produce the cortisol and adrenaline, and when they're producing a lot of cortisol, they aren't able to produce a compound that's very similar to progesterone. And so a lot of women who are under stress chronically might have more symptoms of premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or they might even start missing periods. So you're going to see a lot of that coming up as well.
Okay, thank you. Could you elaborate a little bit more on some recommendations for stress management for people who are in the essential workforce and working on the front lines? You talked quite a bit about people who are working from home, but I thought you might have some specific suggestions for those who are still going to work every day, and how employers can effectively communicate with them when their time and attention is very limited. What are some mechanisms that you would recommend for reaching out to those folks?
I think, just creating a place that's visible for employees, whether that's, a short weekly email being sent out to everyone, with the resources that are available, with the people they can reach out to if needed. Having, like I said, a virtual open door policy for those people can be really important, even for people who are still coming into work, or just having, that information available in a place where people regularly visit. I mean, people still have to use the restroom. So in addition to signs for good hand washing, you might want to put up a little quick blurb about, protecting health. It's not so easy to just recommend to people, what do we do about mindfulness? Because as we talked about before, some people are having very basic physiological fear, and it's very difficult to jump from, base needs to mindfulness. That requires quite a bit of a jump for people, but it might be easier for them to just focus on breathing for a minute or two. Than to do a full-on program on mindfulness, or to talk to people about awareness of their body, such as their heart rate, or regulating their breathing. Like really simple exercises that people can do that take less than a minute could definitely be shared with people who are still working.
Okay, I just want to remind everyone you can submit your questions using the Q&A function. I have a question about introvert versus extrovert. I've had friends and family members who think of themselves as introverts who don't seem to be as impacted as much by social distancing as those I know who tend to be more on the extrovert scale, where they get a lot of energy from social interaction, and that's what helps them stay up and not get depressed. Is there really a difference in how an extrovert or an introvert would respond to a crisis of this nature?
I don't know if it's really going to be like extrovert versus introvert. We all have different fears on different levels. An extrovert may be more preoccupied with, grief or loneliness, because that's something they're more prone to feeling. Whereas introverts may have very different coping mechanisms for dealing with loneliness, and may, feel more self-reliant or self-sufficient during these times. I'm not sure that anyone's, done a full study on that. It might make sense that someone might be happier, that they're like working alone. They don't feel the obligation to go out and socialize as much as they did before. But in the end, they might still be having fears of getting the illness, or of those around them who aren't introverts getting sick because they are out socializing. I think we can't think of people as introverts as more likely to be islands. They have very different ways of processing information and of staying energized and focused. So we don't necessarily want to forget about them. I think, knowing all people are individuals and just staying aware of what fears are coming up for different people is really important. And again, that just goes back to asking. We don't want to assume like, oh, our introverted workers must be really happy right now because they're all at home. Nobody's bothering them. And our extrovert workers must really want us to set up Zoom rooms and, after hours, happy hours where they all get together and drink via video, or something. I think that just having the ability to ask people what they want or what they might need during this time is important.
Thank you. One last question and then we'll wrap up unless we get some more submitted in the next couple minutes. Regarding just things you can do to reduce your stress level, which we hear a lot about: physical exercise, getting quality sleep, practicing yoga and meditation. Are there any, what is your opinion about natural remedies? A lot of people turn to herbal remedies or teas, vitamins. What do you recommend that people may or may not want to try to induce a more positive response in their bodies?
I guess I would say it's just, keeping it really basic. You don't want to add things to your body that will elevate your stress response. So, your body would respond to physical stress such as, poor food or, lack of movement in the same way. So, high sugar is really bad during this time, high salt, because salt is another one of those things that has to be regulated by your adrenal glands. So if your adrenal glands are already taxed and you're eating a lot of really salty food, it can cause a big load on the body. So really focusing on, fresh fruits and vegetables, things that are lower in sugar. People are adopting Whole30 during this time, which can be really helpful. As far as supplements, it's hard to recommend supplements to people simply because there's really no regulation on supplements. So people are getting all kinds of ideas of what does or does not help their immune system during this time. A popular one might be elderberry, which a lot of those come in a syrup form, again, really high in sugar, not necessarily great for people to be ingesting a lot of excess sugar in this time. And so, very basic things. If you're eating really good quality fruits and vegetables, you should be getting enough of the components that you need. You wouldn't need to take supplements. Some things that your adrenals use a lot of would be omega-3 fatty acids. So either that would be more of a Mediterranean diet with fatty fish, salmon, is a really good one, or a fish oil supplement can be helpful for some people if you're not getting a lot of omega-3 in your diet. Magnesium tends to be something else that can be depleted when people's adrenals are taxed. So a lot of people might take magnesium citrate or magnesium gluconate, but too much magnesium will cause diarrhea, so be careful with that. Magnesium also helps people sleep, so sometimes taking it at night can be really helpful as well. Those are probably the main ones I would say. But I wouldn't really focus on, there's so many herbal supplements out there, and without any kind of formal regulation on those, you really don't know what you're getting half the time. A lot of them are filled with fillers and other things that just aren't good for your body. And so, I wouldn't spend the money on a supplement. I'd rather spend the money on some healthy food. And getting a lot of good frozen vegetables, because those are really high in nutritional quality and can be stored for a long time so that you don't have to go to the grocery store as frequently for the fresh produce.
That's great advice. Thank you.
Thanks.
That concludes our webinar for today. I just want to remind everyone that we do post all our webinars on our YouTube channel, and as a registrant, you'll receive a link to that. And to please check out all of our COVID-19 resources on our website at www.workcare.com. And I hope you'll join us for the next in our series, which is our weekly briefing on Wednesdays. Again, thank you, Dr. Busse, for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.